The crystal towers of Zephyr Prime shattered like glass as another wave of enemy fire rained down from the dark sky above. The peaceful planet had never known war before today. Their beautiful cities, made entirely of living crystal that grew from the ground like trees, were being destroyed piece by piece. Ambassador Cathera stood in what remained of the Capitol building's communication center. Her body was made of the same translucent crystal as her people, and right now it was flashing, bright red with panic and fear. She had to get help, and she had to get it fast. Her six-fingered hands shook as she activated the emergency transmitter that would reach the Galactic Council. The device hummed to life, sending her desperate message across the stars to the governing body that was supposed to protect peaceful worlds like hers. "This is Ambassador Cathera of Zephyr Prime," she spoke into the transmitter, her voice crackling with static from the interference caused by the ongoing bombardment above. "We are under attack by the Korthok Empire. They appeared 3 days ago without warning and began destroying our cities. We are not a military world. We have no defenses." She paused as another explosion rocked the building, sending crystal fragments raining down around her. "We require minimal assistance to drive them away. Perhaps just one patrol ship would be enough to make them leave. The Korthok forces number around 200 vessels, but they are only raiders looking for easy targets. If they see official council ships, they will surely retreat." The message was sent racing through space at faster than light speeds, carrying her people's last hope with it. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away on the Galactic Council's massive space station, Administrator Velteth was having a very ordinary day, reviewing routine paperwork. The Council governed over 3,000 different species across the galaxy, and most problems were small ones that could wait. Velteth had been doing this job for 30 years, and very little surprised him anymore. His species looked somewhat like giant praying mantises, with long thin limbs and large compound eyes. His office was filled with holographic displays showing reports from across the galaxy. Trade disputes, border disagreements, minor pirate raids, all the usual business of keeping peace among the stars. When Cathara's message arrived, Velteth barely looked up from his other work. The Korthok Empire had been causing trouble lately. It was true. They were known for attacking weak colonies, stealing whatever they could carry, and then disappearing back into the lawless regions of space. But 200 ships was actually quite small for them. Most of their raids involved only 20 or 30 vessels. "Another Rimworld problem," he muttered to himself, filing the report in his non-urgent folder. The Galactic Council had standard procedures for this sort of thing. They would form a committee, discuss the situation for a few weeks, and then send a small peacekeeping force if the situation hadn't resolved itself by then. But then his assistant, a nervous young being from the same species, came rushing into his office with more urgent news. "Sir, we're getting follow-up reports from Zephyr Prime," the assistant said, his voice high with worry. "The situation is worse than the initial message indicated. The Korthok forces aren't just raiding, they're systematically destroying the planet's agricultural facilities. They're targeting civilian population centers. This isn't a raid, sir. This is genocide." Velteth's mandibles clicked together in annoyance. This was exactly the kind of situation that could cause political problems for him. If a council member world was completely destroyed while under his watch, it would look very bad on his performance reviews. The other administrators would blame him for not acting quickly enough. "How long would it take to assemble a standard peacekeeping force?" he asked. 3 weeks minimum, sir. The Committee for Military Affairs needs to approve any deployment, and they're currently in recess. 3 weeks was far too long. The planet would be dead by then. Velteth needed a solution that could be implemented immediately, without going through the usual bureaucratic channels. Then he remembered the newest members of the Galactic Council, the humans from a small planet called Earth. They had only joined 6 months ago, and they were still eager to prove themselves as worthy members of galactic civilization. Their planet was classified as a death world in the Council databases, meaning it was unusually dangerous compared to most inhabited worlds. But that also meant its people were supposedly tougher and more suited to military action. Contact the human delegation, Veltath decided. Request that they send appropriate assistance to Zephyr Prime. These Deathworlders should be able to handle a simple raid situation. The message was prepared and sent to Earth with low priority routing. After all, what could one small, primitive planet really contribute? Veltath expected them to send maybe 1 or 2 ships at most. It would be enough to drive off the raiders and save his reputation without requiring any major military deployment. He had no idea that his simple request was about to change everything. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in the most secure military facility on Earth, Admiral Jack Morrison was having the worst day of his career. The 60-year-old veteran had seen combat on 4 different continents and commanded fleets in 3 separate wars. But nothing had prepared him for what he was looking at right now. The massive holographic display in Terra Command's war room showed live footage from Zephyr Prime, transmitted through secret intelligence channels that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. Morrison's weathered face, marked with scars from his days as a frontline soldier, was lit up by the blue glow of the tactical screens surrounding him. What he saw made his blood run cold. The crystal cities of Zephyr Prime were being methodically destroyed, but this wasn't random violence. The Korthak forces were following a specific pattern that Morrison recognized from humanity's own dark history. They were targeting hospitals first, then schools, then any building that might shelter civilians. This wasn't a raid for resources. This was deliberate genocide. Captain Lisa Hayes, Morrison's second-in-command, stood beside him, reading the official message from the Galactic Council. She was a younger officer, only 35, but she had earned her position through pure merit during the border wars. Her usually calm voice carried a note of disbelief as she read aloud. "Sir, the Council is asking for appropriate assistance to deal with the situation. Based on their previous communications, they seem to expect us to send maybe 1 destroyer, possibly 2 patrol ships at most." Morrison's jaw clenched as he watched another hospital explode on the screen. The Korthok weren't just killing the crystal beings, they were making sure no one could help the survivors. Medical facilities, food distribution centers, water purification plants, everything that kept a civilization alive was being systematically eliminated. 1 ship. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone in the room could hear the anger building beneath his calm exterior. They think 1 ship is appropriate for this. He turned away from the displays to face his senior staff. These were men and women who had fought alongside him in humanity's worst conflicts. They knew what real war looked like. They understood what happened when civilized peoples stood by and did nothing, while innocent populations were slaughtered. Colonel Ryan Brooks, the head of Marine Operations, stepped forward. He had been studying the tactical situation for the past hour, and his analysis was grim. "Sir, intelligence estimates the Korthok have at least 200 ships in the system. But more concerning is their ground deployment. They're not just bombing from orbit, they have landing forces specifically targeting civilian shelters." Morrison nodded grimly. This was exactly the kind of operation that humanity had learned to recognize and fear during their own history. The systematic elimination of a people, carried out with military precision and cold efficiency. They want appropriate assistance. Morrison finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in the darkest moments of human history. "Then by God, they'll get exactly that." What happened next had never been seen before in galactic history. Within 30 minutes, every military base on Earth received the same emergency transmission. Not a request, not a suggestion, but a direct order from the highest levels of Terran command: full fleet mobilization, code black, all forces deploy immediately. At installations across the planet, sirens began wailing. Soldiers who had been eating dinner with their families dropped their forks and ran for their transports. Pilots who had been asleep in their bunks were awakened by emergency lights and rushed to their fighters. Marine units that had been conducting training exercises immediately loaded onto assault ships. The Earth's orbital shipyards, massive structures that had been built in secret over the past decade, suddenly came alive with activity. Ships that had been in maintenance were rushed back into service. Crews that had been on leave were recalled by emergency broadcasts. Weapons that had never been fired in anger were loaded and prepared for combat. But the real shock came when the full scope of humanity's military capability was revealed for the first time. 500 warships began moving out of Earth's defensive perimeter. Not the small patrol boats and destroyers that other species used for peacekeeping, but massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships designed by a species that had learned to wage war on a planetary scale, equipped with weapons that had been tested in the fires of global conflict. 50,000 Marines began boarding assault transports. These weren't peacekeepers trained for crowd control and diplomatic missions. These were warriors forged in the crucible of a Deathworld soldiers whose ancestors had fought through ice ages and plagues and wars that lasted for decades. They were trained for exactly this kind of mission. Across the galaxy, every monitoring station and early warning system began screaming alerts. The largest military fleet in recorded galactic history was moving at once, and it was all heading for one destination. On the Galactic Council Station, Administrator Velteth was frantically trying to establish communication with Earth. His displays showed fleet movements that his computers insisted were impossible. No single world could possibly support this many military vessels. The energy signatures alone suggested weapon systems that violated several interstellar treaties. Morrison's response, when it finally came, was broadcast on every council communication frequency simultaneously. You requested appropriate assistance against a genocidal force. Request acknowledged and fulfilled. Terran defense, fleet en route. The galaxy was about to learn what humans considered appropriate when innocent people were being murdered. Warlord Rex stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Blood Harvest, watching the destruction below with cold satisfaction. Through the viewscreen, he could see another crystal city on Zephyr Prime crumbling under his bombardment. The translucent buildings collapsed like fragile glass sculptures, sending rainbow fragments spinning through the alien atmosphere. Rex was a veteran of over 50 campaigns across the galaxy. His species, the Korthok, were natural warriors, 7 feet tall, covered in thick gray hide that could deflect small arms fire, and equipped with 4 powerful arms that made them deadly in close combat. His face bore the ritual scars of his rank, deep cuts that had been filled with metal to show his status as a warlord. The crystal beings make such interesting sounds when they break, Rex mused to his bridge crew, listening to the high-pitched wailing coming from the planet's surface. Almost musical. It's a shame they have so little useful metal in their bodies, but their planet's mineral deposits will make up for that disappointment. His communications officer, a younger Korthok warrior named Throck, looked up from his console with confusion. Sir, our long-range sensors are detecting something unusual. There's a large fleet approaching our position. Very large. Rex barely glanced away from the destruction below. Council peacekeepers, no doubt. How many ships? 20? 30? I hope they at least put up more of a fight than the last ones. Sir, Throke's voice carried a note of uncertainty. The sensors are reading over 400 vessels, and they're moving in perfect formation at speeds that should be impossible for ships that size. Now Rex turned his attention to the tactical display. What he saw made him laugh out loud. The approaching fleet was enormous, far larger than anything he had ever faced. But that just meant the Council was finally taking him seriously as a threat. It was about time. 400 ships. Rex's laugh was harsh and grating. The Council must be more worried about their reputation than I thought. What species signature are the ships showing? Throck checked his readings twice before answering. Human, sir? The ship designs don't match anything in our combat database. Rex's scarred face twisted into a predatory grin. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, and Rex had been looking forward to testing them in battle. From what his intelligence network had reported, they came from some backwater planet that the Council had only recently discovered, probably another species of weak-willed peace lovers who would run at the first sign of real violence. Humans, Rex repeated, with amusement. Fresh meat. The Council is so desperate, they're sending their newest recruits to deal with me. This should be entertaining. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace with a precision that Rex had to admire. Every ship appeared at exactly the same moment, in perfect geometric formation. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and they were covered with weapon systems that Rex didn't recognize. But what impressed him most was their size. These weren't the small patrol boats and frigates that usually came after him. These were warships built for serious combat. Before Rex could finish analyzing the fleet composition, a communication came through on all frequencies. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly without emotion. Korthok Forces, this is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have 30 minutes to withdraw all vessels from Zephyrian space and surrender for trial. This is your only warning. Rex burst into laughter that echoed throughout his bridge. His crew joined in, the sound of dozens of Korthok warriors finding the human ultimatum hilarious. 30 minutes. These newcomers clearly had no idea how galactic warfare actually worked. 30 minutes, Rex called out to his crew. Did you hear that? They think they can give me an ultimatum. The laughter grew louder. Rex had been raiding Council space for over 20 years. He had fought their peacekeepers dozens of times, and he knew exactly how these encounters went. First, there would be negotiations. The peacekeepers would try to talk him into leaving peacefully. When that failed, they would issue warnings about proportional response and rules of engagement. Then they would make a few token attacks on his outer ships while trying to avoid civilian casualties. Finally, when Rex started targeting their own vessels, they would retreat and call for reinforcements. Rex opened a channel to the human fleet, his voice booming with confidence and contempt. I am Warlord Rex of the Korthok Empire. I have been raiding Council space since before your species even knew there were other worlds among the stars. You will turn your ships around and leave immediately, or I will add your hulls to my collection and your crews to my slave markets. To emphasize his point and show these humans what they were really dealing with, Rex gave an order that he had given countless times before. All ships, target the largest population center on the planet. Full bombardment. Let these humans see what happens to those who challenge the Korthok Empire. The resulting explosion was visible from orbit. A crystal city, containing over 2 million beings, simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. Rex had done this same demonstration dozens of times against Council peacekeepers. They always backed down after witnessing the casual destruction of innocent life. But the human response was unlike anything Rex had ever heard from a Council species. The same calm, emotionless voice came back over the communication channel. Warning acknowledged. 30 minutes begins now. Rex stopped laughing. There was something in that voice, or rather, something missing from it, that made him suddenly uncomfortable. Where were the outraged protests about civilian casualties? Where were the demands for negotiation? Where was the fear? For the first time in 20 years of raiding, Warlord Rex began to wonder if he had made a serious mistake. Admiral Morrison watched the digital countdown on his command console tick down to 0. 29 minutes and 59 seconds had passed since he gave Warlord Rex the ultimatum to withdraw. The Korthok leader had spent those precious minutes laughing, making threats, and murdering innocent civilians to prove his point. Now the time for talking was over. Morrison felt the familiar sensation that always came before battle, a strange calm that settled over his mind like a cold fog. Around him on the bridge of the Terran flagship Earth's Vengeance, his crew moved with the smooth efficiency of a machine built for war. These weren't peacekeepers or diplomats. These were warriors from a world that had tried to kill them every single day of their evolution. All ships, Morrison's voice cut through the fleet communications network, reaching every captain and crew member in the massive human armada. Execute Total War Protocol. No survivors, no mercy, no exceptions. The response was immediate and devastating. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The Korthok had expected the usual pattern of galactic warfare: careful negotiations, gradual escalation, and the polite dance of limited conflict that characterized most interstellar disputes. Other species fought wars like they were playing chess, making careful moves while trying to minimize casualties and preserve their own reputations. But humans had learned to fight wars very differently. Instead of targeting the most dangerous Korthok vessels first, the human fleet attacked everything. Simultaneously, every ship, every supply depot, every communication relay, every escape route, all of it came under fire at exactly the same moment. The attack was coordinated with a precision that seemed impossible for such a large force. Warlord Rex stood on his bridge, watching his tactical displays with growing disbelief. His invincible fleet, which had terrorized the galaxy for decades, was being systematically destroyed by tactics he had never encountered before. These humans weren't following any known rules of engagement. They weren't trying to capture territory or negotiate surrender. They were simply erasing his entire force from existence. "Sir," his communications officer shouted over the sound of explosions. "They're jamming all our frequencies. We can't coordinate with the other ships, sir." Another crew member called out, "They're targeting our supply ships first. How did they know which vessels carried our ammunition and fuel?" Rex realized with growing horror that these humans had been studying his forces long before they arrived. They knew exactly which ships to hit to cause maximum damage. They had planned this attack down to the smallest detail, and now they were executing it with ruthless efficiency. But what terrified Rex most was how the humans treated their own casualties. When Korthok ships managed to destroy human vessels, the surrounding human ships didn't retreat or pause to rescue survivors. They simply continued their attack as if nothing had happened. These creatures were willing to sacrifice their own people to ensure total victory. "They fight like demons," Rex whispered, watching another section of his fleet disappear in a ball of fire. Then his flagship's shields began to fail. The Blood Harvest had been built to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at it, but the concentrated fire from dozens of human warships was more than its defenses could handle. Warning alarms screamed throughout the ship as critical systems began shutting down. Rex felt the entire vessel shudder as something impacted the hull with tremendous force. Then another impact, and another. Boarding pods. His security chief reported multiple breaches on decks 7, 12, and 15. Rex had faced boarding parties before. Usually, they were small groups of council peacekeepers who tried to capture key areas while avoiding unnecessary casualties. Rex always managed to negotiate or fight his way out of these situations. But when the first human Marines breached his bridge, Rex knew immediately that this was different. They moved through the corridors of his ship like death itself. Their armor was black as space, and their faces were hidden behind masks that made them look like the demons from Korthok nightmares. They didn't shout warnings or demand surrender. They simply eliminated any resistance with cold, mechanical precision. When they reached the bridge, Rex watched his elite guards, warriors, who had never been defeated in personal combat, fall within seconds. The humans moved with a speed and coordination that seemed inhuman. Rex fell to his knees and raised all four of his arms in the universal gesture of surrender. According to every galactic convention, this should have ended the violence. Prisoners of war had rights. Surrendering enemies were supposed to be treated with basic dignity. Captain Tom Bradley, the human leading the boarding party, slowly removed his combat helmet to reveal a face that was completely without emotion. His eyes were cold and determined, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "I surrender," Rex shouted in the common galactic language. "According to the laws of war, I demand to be treated as a prisoner." Bradley looked down at the Korthok warlord with the same expression he might use when looking at an insect. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger, no hatred, just the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Your chance to surrender was 30 minutes ago, Rex. You chose to murder civilians instead." Bradley's words were quiet, but they filled the bridge like thunder. Deathworlders don't negotiate with genocidal maniacs. Rex realized, in his final moments, that he had made a fundamental mistake about these humans. He had thought they were just another council species, civilized, predictable, bound by rules and treaties. But these weren't peacekeepers from a civilized world. These were apex predators from a planet that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. And they had just taught the galaxy what happened when you threatened innocent life in front of humanity. The Battle of Zephyr Prime was about to end, but its lessons would echo across the stars forever. 18 hours after Admiral Morrison gave the order to attack, the Battle of Zephyr Prime was over. The silence in space was almost complete, broken only by the occasional piece of debris floating past the human ships. Where once there had been 200 Korthok vessels terrorizing an innocent world, now there was nothing but empty space and scattered wreckage. Not a single Korthok ship had escaped, not one. The completeness of the victory shocked every monitoring station in the galaxy. Military analysts who had been tracking the battle couldn't believe their sensors. In their experience, space battles lasted for days, or even weeks, with ships retreating and regrouping multiple times. Fleets were rarely destroyed completely. There were always survivors. Always ships that managed to escape to fight another day. But the humans had operated by different rules entirely. Within hours of the battle's end, emergency sessions were being called in government buildings across the galaxy. Species that had never paid attention to the small blue planet called Earth were suddenly demanding to know everything about these newcomers. Intelligence agencies were frantically reviewing their files on human military capabilities, only to discover that those files were almost empty. The Galactic Council's emergency session was held in the Grand Chamber that had seen thousands of years of diplomatic meetings. The massive circular room, with its towering ceiling and seats for representatives from over 3,000 species, had hosted debates about trade routes, territorial disputes, and cultural exchanges. But it had never seen anything like this. Ambassador David Chen walked to the central podium with the same calm confidence he had shown during humanity's first contact with galactic civilization 6 months earlier. He was a career diplomat, trained in the art of negotiation and compromise, but today he was speaking for a species that had just demonstrated it was capable of total war. Around him, the chamber buzzed with shocked whispers and fearful conversations. Council members who had treated humanity as junior partners were now looking at the human delegation with new eyes. These weren't the primitive newcomers they had thought they were dealing with. Council member Nethery, a tall, elegant being from one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, stood to address Chen directly. Her species had been part of galactic society for over 10,000 years, and they prided themselves on their advanced understanding of diplomacy and warfare. The humans used excessive force, she declared, her voice carrying the authority of ancient tradition. This massacre violates every galactic convention of warfare that has been established over millennia of civilized conflict. The chamber fell silent as every species waited for Chen's response. How would humanity defend actions that went against everything galactic civilization stood for. Chen's answer was simple, direct, and it changed everything. "You asked us for appropriate assistance against a genocidal force," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber. "We provided exactly that. The Korthak Empire has spent decades committing atrocities across the rim worlds. While you debated committee procedures and worried about political consequences, we ended that threat permanently." Another council member, representing a species known for their philosophical approach to conflict, tried to interrupt, but the scale of destruction was unprecedented, was proportional to the threat. Chen cut him off. "The Korthak weren't raiders looking for quick profit. They were systematically exterminating an entire species while you held committee meetings. If you wanted a limited engagement with rules and negotiations, you should have specified that before innocent people started dying." Chen paused, looking around the chamber at representatives who had never faced the kind of existential threats that had shaped human evolution. "Humans don't fight wars to make political statements or preserve our reputation," he continued. "We fight to eliminate threats to innocent life. When you ask a species that evolved on a death world for military assistance, you get exactly what the situation requires, not what makes you comfortable." The aftermath of Chen's speech rippled across the galaxy faster than the news of the battle itself. Within days, the political landscape had changed completely. The Korthak Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for over 50 years, simply collapsed. The remaining territories surrendered en masse rather than face human retaliation. Warlords, who had never shown fear in their lives, were broadcasting messages of unconditional surrender to Earth. Other aggressive species that had been planning expansion into peaceful territories quietly canceled their operations. The hegemony of Zephyr, known for their brutal conquest of agricultural worlds, suddenly became interested in trade negotiations instead of military campaigns. The Crimson Fleet pirates, who had operated with impunity in the outer systems, simply vanished into the deep void rather than risk encountering human ships. Admiral Morrison, meanwhile, found himself dealing with an interesting contradiction. He received a formal commendation from the grateful crystal beings of Zephyr Prime, who credited him with saving their entire species from extinction. At the same time, 3 council members issued formal censures, condemning his excessive use of force and violation of established military protocols. Morrison accepted both with equal indifference. He had saved innocent lives, and that was all that mattered to him. But the most significant change came in an unprecedented request from the Galactic Council itself. For the first time in their history, they formally asked the member species to establish new military doctrines for Council forces. Morrison's response became legendary throughout the galaxy. Standing before the assembled representatives of 3,000 species, the battle-scarred human admiral delivered words that would be quoted for generations. "When you ask Deathworlders for appropriate assistance, you get what the situation requires, not what makes you comfortable. Remember that the next time innocent people are dying while you debate." The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about the species from the small blue planet. Humans had fought for survival every single day of their evolution, and they had brought that same ruthless determination to the stars. The age of limited warfare and polite conflicts was over. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they played by different rules entirely.